Beliefs. Moderating tonight is Pilar Viladas. Just briefly about Pilar. She's a writer and a magazine editor that has been friends with many of us on the West Coast for a number of years. I think perhaps a bit of a bias, because I like her a lot, but I think what's can be corroborated as fact among many of us that have been practicing here for a very long time and for a number of years with very little interest to anybody beyond the boundaries or any east of the Rockies. There used to be an architectural historian among us named Esther McCoy, who championed the cause of West Coast architecture. I think when Esther was still alive and prior to Pilar moving to Los Angeles to live, she was the other person that championed the cause of West Coast architecture, and I think to the benefit of all of us that have been practicing here for a number of years, and I guess I would like to think in a self-serving way to the benefit of New York. So, in any case, with that, here's Pilar to introduce the two speakers this evening.
Thank you for that unexpected and very wonderful introduction, Michael. Our first speaker will be Gisue Hariri. Gisue Hariri was born in Iran, and she received her Bachelor of Architecture from Cornell and has been an adjunct associate professor of architecture at Columbia University since 1987. She practices architecture in New York with her sister, Mojgan. Their work ranges from renovations and additions to private homes and includes designs for furniture and lighting. Hariri and Hariri were winners of the Young Architects Forum in 1990, sponsored by the Architectural League of New York, and their work was selected by Progressive Architecture magazine for its 1990 Young Architects issue, among other of the many magazines in which the Hariri's work has been published. Gisue Hariri.
Thank you very much for inviting me here tonight. There were a lot of rumors that I heard about SCI-Arc, and literally every single one is true, at least up to now. They told me it was a hole in the wall, which it is, but it's fabulous, so I'm very excited, and already have met a lot of people that I talked to on the phone and imagined via pictures and their work published. So anyways, tonight I'm going to show you some work in two categories. First, experimental and in a sense non-commissioned projects, and then the built work. Is not. We do not believe in chaos. We do not follow trends, and we despise kitsch. It is the intention of our work to bring together in an equilibrium the mind that disintegrates and categorizes, and the soul that is in constant search for universal unity of all things and events. We believe that all opposites are polar, but at the same time only different aspects of the same phenomena. That all opposites are interdependent, and their conflict can never result in total victory of one side, and the result can only be a manifestation of the interplay between the two. Examples of this concept: the unification of the opposites can be found in modern physics at subatomic level, where particles are both destructible and indestructible, where matter is both continuous and discontinuous. And force and matter are different aspects of the same phenomenon. Life in general and architecture in particular are like force and matter intertwined. It is the events and the smallest experiences in life that form visions of architecture. I need the slides. Can we have the slides, please? Our struggle ever since we started working together has been the search for the unknown that perhaps has been hidden in the depths of one's subconscious. To give voice to something with incredible potential, perhaps latent but once expressed, then opening up a lot of possibilities for development. And the reason for this is finding an alternative to a mass of prescribed opinions and basing the work on a body of findings that have been personally experienced and free from stylistic imitations. This project is about a place where one finds unexpectedly an architectural oasis offering refuge from the chaos of everyday life. The site is completely imaginary, with all the contours and its formation totally fabricated in our minds. This idealized structure contains a series of walls composed in mathematical and geometrical proportions. It is neither complete nor incomplete. The position and proportion of walls are carefully calculated to create intimate spaces offering peace and quiet to the individual. The intention here is the equilibrium between landscape and architecture. Like the previous project, this one is also about site and structure, man and nature. It is a lighthouse, which we actually donated to the Lighthouse Foundation and was auctioned to raise funds for a development center serving visually impaired. This structure is made out of steel, sandblasted glass, and AAA batteries. It is sited on top of a brownstone, giving light and guidance via its tectonic quality to those deprived of sight. The premise of this project, sponsored by Storefront for Art and Architecture, was to generate a set of possibilities that could provoke the elimination of DMZ, demilitarized zone between North and South Koreas, through peaceful means. Our proposal takes form of a bridge structure, metaphorically built over an obstacle. The attempt here was to create a metaphysical path where two sides come together for peaceful talk and meditation. It is 20 feet wide, 100 feet high, and 1,000 feet long, stretched between Seoul and Pyongyang. Points of entry from each side is via ramps, elevating one above the ground plane. This is the entry from the other side. The elements of the structure fit precisely into one another, making a whole. Each element is complete in itself and yet part of a larger whole. Suspected from the main structure is an observation deck, creating space for observing and understanding the wasted political landscape. And finally, the voided center, showing the meaninglessness of human conflict. Now I'm showing you two drawings from a series that we have started recently. And actually these two are part of an exhibit, I believe, in Grand Palais in Paris. For us, this work has become a laboratory for investigation and a testing ground for inventing structures and spaces, forms and connections which are unknown. This work is in its very early stages, and as you see, perhaps a bit strange, slightly surreal, and guaranteed we were not on drugs when we did them. However, the aim here, again, is to strip architecture of everything routine and accepted in favor of an aesthetic synthesis as a means to express sensation and thought, free from any style. In this regard, Schopenhauer explains that to have original, extraordinary, and perhaps even immortal ideas, one has to isolate oneself from the world for a few moments so completely that the most commonplace happenings appear to be new and unfamiliar, and in this way reveal their true essence. These drawings are quite large, about 3 feet by 6 feet, and this one is offering a complex interaction of spaces with fluid connections. In this drawing, we see massive walls passing over and under one another, developing into points of inflation. We are now in the process of making these drawings into three-dimensional models and trying to transform them into architectural possibilities. And I remember our first commissioned project. With this project came 3 givens: a dog that ate sheetrock, a construction crew from Vermont due to lack of proper funds and extremely difficult to communicate with, as you see, and a collection of primitive artifacts. We designed this project around 3 walls. A stucco wall that ran through the entire length of the apartment, which we called the wall of present. You see this wall on the right of the slides. And here we realize stucco is the best solution for dogs who eat sheetrock. Parallel to the wall of present is the second wall, and this wall we call the wall of the past. This wall is composed of series of niches to hold the collection. This wall is a freestanding wall, allowing natural light to penetrate the entry from the windows beyond, and it becomes a closet for the master bedroom on the other side. Some close-up details. The third wall is a curtain wall made out of steel and glass. It spans the entire width of the living area. And this wall we call the wall of future. And as you see, it intersects the wall of present. Here we also had a chance to design some light fixtures, of course, if we could beat the market price. So we designed very simple fixtures made out of plate glass with metal brackets and tubular light behind. And finally, the stucco wall extends out into the terrace with openings framing favorite objects beyond. The next project is a renovation of a SoHo loft. Here we kept the lower level basically open, very loft-like, and organized spaces around two parallel walls, the wall of fireplace and the dividing wall between study and dining area. We were also asked to replace an already existing spiral stair due to the fact that the number of rotations one had to make to go up or down made one very dizzy. However, the challenge was to keep the existing opening in the ceiling framed for that particular spiral stair. This challenge became the major experiment of this project. After many attempts, we came up with a hybrid stair. It's partially straight and partially spiral, and then the two were connected and united by a single sheet of steel curving in a logarithmic spiral. Here, the real discovery for us was the phenomenon of creating space by curving a plane in the z-axis and consequently making an ambiguous situation of being inside and outside of this plane simultaneously, just like the Mobius strip. This is the construction of the stair. On the left, the central pipe of the spiral and the existing opening, and on the right, a section of the straight part. Two New York sculptors, Dan George and Mark Gibeon, fabricated this stair because no stair fabricated agreed to do this. This project required most of the work to be done on site. This is the lower part. You see the beginning of the sheet, the stringer and the cantilevered landing platform. Here you see the two parts together, and that's my sister and my partner on top of the landing saying hello to you all here. Some details, and finally the spiral going through the opening. This is the view from the study looking at the bar. Stools and light fixtures were designed along the same line and were fabricated by another New York artist, Scott Madsen. In the bar unit, we contrasted the steel with mahogany and marble, which brought color, texture, and warmth together into the space. Now you see the fireplace wall, rough in texture, with a simple composition of a log box and linear marble mantel. Across from the fireplace wall is the dividing wall between the study and the dining. We made it freestanding by making floor-to-ceiling openings on either side. This then required the overscaled doors. You see the scale on the left and view of the study on the right. On the upper level, you have the master suite and the roof terrace. This is the entry to the master bedroom. Up here, colors, textures, and materials are much softer. You see the cabinetry and the view of the bedroom. A simple bathroom, and finally the terrace. Next project is a rather small project. Here the difficulty was an undefined living area to place furniture in, and a typical New York problem of not having enough shelving for your stereo, your books, and your tchotchkes. The challenge here was to define the missing corners of the room without taking too much space, of course. So we came up with these devices that started from the existing corners and extended out to complete the missing corners with just 2 points. To do this, we superimposed different geometries with rotating planes, which then took different materials. This way, we solved the problem of shelving, completed the missing corners, and provided room for the stereo and the speakers. This is the device across from the fireplace. And before and after shots. She had a lot more stuff, but we cleaned it up for photography. This project is another challenging project, programmatically and functionally. Here we were asked to define 3 distinct spaces, dining, living, and kitchen, and yet combine them into one open space. This apartment also had to be child-proof. They had 4 kids, 2 cats, and lots of toys. So we designed everything in stainless steel and put our main architectural piece on the ceiling. No one, even the cats, can reach it, so. This elaborate lighting unit actually defines the living area and conceptually connects all the other parts. The 2 main elements of this space are a fireplace mantel and a bar unit. These 2 are both hybrid pieces, and by that I mean that they do each more than one thing functionally. For example, the fireplace mantel has a log box and is utensil holder at the same time. The bar unit is a space divider, a counter, and holds a television at the same time. This actually condition of hybrid conditions, I guess, in dense urban situations is unavoidable these days. And in fact, technology has already responded to this condition, providing hybrid machines. I mean, we have one of them, you know, it's a telephone, fax, copier, answering machine, all in one unit. Some details. And finally, dining and library are combined so that the table can be used for both eating and reading. And some projects are even tighter and smaller. However, the smaller the project gets, the more ambitious one becomes to make a difference and to make something out of it. This is a 5 by 12 bathroom. Here we made the vanity a horizontal plane made out of granite with a dynamic form, tapered at one end to allow flow and easy circulation. This plane is supported by an oval storage unit at one end, and this oval volume was very difficult to make because it required a continuous weld where the top and the sides came together. It also has a curved flush door. I think you can see it on one of the slides. And the sculptor who made it swore that he will never make it again. One of a kind. All the horizontal planes and glass shelves finalized with a vertical lighting fixture made out of stainless and glass tubes. Detailed drawings and detail of the top part of this lighting unit. And finally with the lights on. Some projects, however, never get built, but they remain essential in one's process, like this one. In this project, we examined how a part of a larger whole can be a whole organism in itself, made out of interrelating parts. On the left, you see the model of the organism, and on the right, you see it as part of the larger environment. This organism has a stair connecting 3 different levels at its head and a curved spine holding the rest of its organs. Details of the stair, details of the spine and the interconnecting parts. Some detail elements. And I think we need to change the carousel. Okay. And now I'm going to show you one of the most recent projects which we have completed. This one is a top floor of a midtown building at a height where the urban grid of Manhattan disappears, and what remains apparent and dominant is actually the random play of volumes and spaces between towers. This is where surprises occur, counterpoint to the rhythm below. Inspired by these conditions, we designed this apartment. On the right, you see partially a grid that appears throughout the apartment and a surprise via a lighting cove above the bar unit. On the left, a corner articulation at the entry beginning a volumetric play. The overall view of the living and dining area. Close-up of the volumetric composition at the dining area. Another surprise is a fireplace mantel curving into 2 directions, downward and outward. Here you see the grid appearing in the interior doors. The volumetric play of details get carried into the bathrooms. This is actually his bathroom. Finally, the master bathroom with a very strange I-shaped medicine cabinet. This actually became her bathroom. And volumetric details of a corner storage unit. This project is an addition to an existing carriage house in Connecticut and is currently under construction. A rural site. And on the right, you kind of get a feeling for the context, confusion of different styles and materials. Here, we also had to build on the existing foundations of a garage and then to provide the connection between the house and the new addition. The major elements of this project are 3 penetrating volumes. A curvilinear volume connecting the existing to the new, a bridge penetrating this volume and connecting the upper floors, and an entry box. On the left, you see the new volume over the existing garage foundation, roofed with a barrow, with the bridge and the curvilinear connector, and on the right, an interior view of the entry hall. Now I will show you quickly some of the construction process. The first cut in the ground, formwork and foundation work. The structure of this addition is a combination of wood and steel, which is, I believe, kind of unusual for this area. Entry framing of the bridge, cantilevered ends of the bridge. The architect and the contractor. At this point, the neighbors got very worried and actually got together and came to us and asked if we were putting a commercial building up. They had never seen so much steel before used in this kind of a condition, so we had to convince them that it really was a simple piece of architecture. Plywood sheeting. On the left, we see the steel posts waiting for the barrel roof, and on the right, finally, the barrel in place. Here is the barrel structure, glulam beams with joists spanning between them. The structure wrapped in wire lath and getting prepared for stucco. We were almost tempted to keep the wire lath as the final finish, but our clients were horrified. I think this is the reason we should move to LA. The different parts coming together. Steel windows and curtain wall being installed. The crack between the volumes. And finally, the beginning of the stucco work. The last project is what we are working on right now and is in a development phase. It's a whole house out of concrete, finally. A villa in St. John's Island. This house evolved from an existing volcanic rock and is cut into the steep hill. The main elements of this project are two intersecting walls, one parallel to the contours, retaining the earth and providing ventilation, which we will see later, and a wall perpendicular to the contours acting as a circulation wall. The upper floor contains living, dining, kitchen, and bar area with an entry court that has a cactus garden, and the lower floor has the bedrooms, the sunbathing terrace, and a smaller bar for the vacationers and in particularly for the architects. The main vertical circulation is through an exterior stair connecting different levels of the house. The stair metaphorically flows like water from the upper parking terrace to the pool, with its landing potentially being used as a diving board. Here you see the ventilation wall. It's like the Persian wind catchers. It provides earth circulation and cross ventilation for both floors. Side elevations. And the very last shot. Thank you very much.
In an article in the August 1988 issue of HG on young architects in New York, the work of Gisue and Gisue Hariri was described as tough yet elegant. And I think the same is certainly true of the work of the next architect who's showing her work this evening, Diana Agrest. Born in Argentina and educated at the University of Buenos Aires and the Sorbonne, Diana Agrest is a principal in the New York firm of Agrest and Gandalsonis Architects and professor of architecture at the Cooper Union and Columbia University. She's been involved since 1975 in the design and development of projects and buildings in the U.S., Europe, and South America. These projects range from single-family houses and apartments to urban buildings and large-scale urban projects, such as one for the master plan of Des Moines, Iowa. She has taught at Princeton and Yale, and her work has been published widely in journals and books, including a forthcoming book from MIT Press, which should be arriving in May, a book of theoretical writings called Architecture from Without, Theoretical Framings of a Critical Practice. Diana Agrest.
Okay. Well, I'm here at last. I've never been here before, so it's nice. It feels good and warm, and I'm glad Gisue started, so it's a little bit warmed up. I'm going to show a very short selection of projects, and which will range from urban projects to interiors. The reason I do that is not necessarily to show a variety of work, but really it's about the concept that underlies in all the work that we do, which is basically the idea that the city is the unconscious of architecture, and that in fact you can't think about architecture without thinking about the urban phenomena, urban form, the city, and the ideologies that go with it. So that rather than starting from a small object and making it going all the way up to the larger object like the city, I believe that the process works exactly the other way around. The projects that I'm going to show tonight are most of them have not been published anywhere. It's work in process, and there's one that has been published. But I want to show the point where my work is now in terms of the question of the city. And let me, if you can turn that light on and the slides. Okay. These two slides represent in a very diagrammatic and almost cliché manner the question that is of very, very great interest for me, not only now but before, but something that I'm working very specifically on, which is the question of the opposition between the object-oriented approach to the city and the fabric-oriented approach to the city, which have characterized the production of urban projects and buildings for all the decades of the century, at least, in terms of this opposition. That is to say that the historical city is seen as a city that's characterized, as we can see in Le Corbusier's drawing, by the fabric, which is considered unhealthy and problematic. And on the other hand, we have what is supposed to be the modern city and modern urbanism, the object placed on a neutral field. The more neutral, the better. This opposition has also characterized more recent different discourses on the question of the city. That is, those who have tried to develop a city that would somehow mimic the historical city, the European city mostly, and those who follow in the modernist tradition of freestanding objects and with an order like that, but most likely, I would say, without it. And it is here we have two extreme examples. We have Camilo Sitter representing the nostalgia for a historical city and a major influence in these decades. and on the right, the result in the reality of the application of the object in the field after the Second World War. To the question of the fabric and the object approach, I present the American city, because the question of the object and the fabric is the problem of the European city. The European city as it's seen is in reality, it's a historical reality, and the European city as it has been seen in terms of conceptual proposals and realizations through the tabula rasa approach. The American city, which in my opinion is the modern city, in fact has a much more interesting situation. It started from a tabula rasa from the very beginning, to which was applied a grid, and most likely an undifferentiated grid in most cases, or in some with very minor situations of breaking it, such as these diagonals or the few squares. When I was coming actually in the plane to the West Coast from New York, I had the most fantastic experience, which was that I looked out the window and all of a sudden I saw a very strange landscape which was all white, and on which there were marked these beautiful black lines of this grid that went all the way till the eye, where the eye could see. And within it were some more irregular lines and little dots, the little black dots. I actually look at the map, where would we be in the airplane magazine, and actually this was the Midwest. And the Midwest these days seems to be in my destiny, because actually we are doing an actual master plan for the city of Des Moines. So maybe it might have been Iowa, I don't know. In any event, it was fascinating because this landscape was exactly the realization of what you see here. And actually it was very, very powerful. So I started writing and sketching this in my notebook. And then I looked out again, and something else happened, which all of a sudden this same landscape had started to transform, and now it was like this brown and white, and was very dramatic, and it had this light and shadow marbleized texture. And so I started writing this again. And so then I looked back again, and so another transformation happened, which was that now the grid was white and the background was brown. And so it was like a positive negative from the first image to the last, and really I think the power had to do with what this represented was really the struggle between a certain order imposed and the tendency to entropy of nature. And I think that's really also something that is at the heart of our cities, which tend to this kind of entropy or chaos, and we try to impose some kind of order. The problem with the Cartesian order that we saw in Le Corbusier's proposals or urban proposals is that in fact it's trying to smooth out the roughness of the tendency to entropy of these edges that the city manages to achieve. So I would like to, in the work that I'm doing and that I'm going to present here briefly, the attempt is to really make this meaning fluctuate between the fabric and the object, and incorporate also as a mediator this question of the grid, this question of these forms that the city itself produces, and that we find there, and in fact that in finding them as a detective or as a psychoanalyst, one gets to encounter some form of hidden architecture or clues for it. And here we have two more examples of the grids, and of course I love the one on the left particularly, and I could go on if this was a different lecture. I could have shown you hundreds of these. And actually, I don't know if you're aware that all of America is gridded with a 1 mile grid. So I think it's very, very important to have that present. In the first project that I'm going to show is a project for Chicago. And these are drawings that were produced by Mario Gandolsonas, my partner, with a computer in a work he did in looking at the Chicago grids. And I'm only using this as a reference, not as part of that whole work. But they're part of an approach that we developed that is about what I just said, reading the city and discovering some structures that are not readily apparent to the naked eye. On the upper left corner, there is this little island. The white is the Chicago River, and the big white is Lake Michigan. And surrounded by the river is an island that's called Goose Island. And we see the same area now with all the different grids that actually are crossing through it. Here we have a different view where, in fact, there is a distinction between the grids that go north-south and the ones that go east-west. And on the right, you can see different forces that come in with some diagonals coming from the north. Here are some other drawings that are different readings of Chicago and the surrounding at a very large scale, and that have to do with different forces that exist in the relationship between the topographic condition and the urban condition that in fact resemble in some way what I described seeing from the airplane. And the project that we did for this is actually a project that we call Fabric as Object. And this is what the issues that we're working on at this moment, which is the idea to take pieces of fabric, but rather than make a continuous fabric as the European city would have, since we live in another reality that is discontinuous, fragmented, and also where we face the situation of this neutral plane that exists already there. So we're developing this approach, which is to take the fabric as something that is cut onto itself as a kind of object that opposes the object as the architectural object per se. So I would say, in a way, it's like an anti-object architecture of an urban scale. These are sketches where we started trying these different pieces of fabric. They're very diagrammatic there, that would be placed on this field of Goose Island. And we would also incorporate some actual object buildings, such as the red triangle, the little brown square, and another piece there with a diagonal I'll show you in a minute. These are more sketches which really try to talk about the energy of these linear structures of the grids of the city that in fact are not all perpendicular as as the previous grid that I showed from the old American city plans, but in fact that in most instances very dynamic and really colliding, playing with each other, etc. And these are two variations. These are called urban ready-mades. And this is what we always put names. I love giving titles to the project. So I would say the generic title for many projects that we're doing in this direction are the question is that of the fabric as object. This specific project is called urban ready-mades in the sense that we're taking these pieces that exist there and relocating, reinstating them in a different order. So in this case, we took this old housing and we have a long strip, which is the Piano Roads of Chicago, that runs north to south. And then you can see to the left, in the upper area, these 4 quadrangles type conditions with different scale. In the middle, you might recognize the relation between the topographic conditions and the grid. And on the bottom right, you can see 2 different things that actually are more of transformations or explorations that we've done ourselves. One is a displaced grid, which is a new housing type that I've been working on that we developed in a previous project for Milano. And then there is something that I just started to work on, which is this spiral single-family housing cluster. Then we added objects like the sphere there, which is a planetarium. Here we realized Le Corbusier's Mundaneum, and then a museum of architectural archaeology at the very end. On the diagonal is the market, and the background, you might recognize the path, and it's this green, this neutral green, this garden green, on which these objects, fabrics, are placed. In fact, the little spaghetti there come from Beverly Hills. Those are the Beverly Hills, actually, streets. And to the right, there's another variation, where, in fact, we have a continuous strip of transformation of different grids, from positive to negative, and a more solid type of market intersection, which in fact is trying to link the grid on either side of the island. And again, we have the objects. One of the objects there is Olympic Sports Center, which really is generated from some of the grids, and you can see that seesaw type intersection there, which is composed of very long swimming pools and lines of tennis courts, basically, and a baseball diamond. So these are these two that I'm going to show here. The next project is quite different. And in fact, the next project is, I think, really a thought in process, although that project has more drawings than the previous one. But it's a project that we did for San Francisco, and it was really actually asked by the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art for a show. And actually we were given a text, a mystery text with which to generate a project for San Francisco. And so we did some mappings, we did some work using the text as a basis. And this is the area where the story in the text takes place, which is the Mission District and the China Basin, which is where you see all those piers, which is where the city meets the Pacific Ocean and the bay. And I'm not going to show all the first mappings and all those drawings, which are quite nice. And the reason I'm not showing them, because at a certain point, I thought, well, what is the title of this show, after all? I really hadn't paid attention. And the title of the show was Visionary San Francisco. And so I thought that there was some kind of contradiction between this visionary, what it implied, and given a text to do one of these reflexive exercises in reading the city through this text, etc., etc. So I said, okay, let's just make a project. And what would be, am I late? So what would be something visionary to do about the city if you would think about today in the traditional way of thinking about visionary? And so we thought, well, for one thing would be to have a city that has no skyscrapers. And so we start from there. And so the other thing that came up was the idea of dealing with the question of nature and ecology. And so what we did, we chose the area of the China Basin, which is where part of the story was taking place, which is an area where now there are railroad tracks and some buildings. It's actually up for development, as a matter of fact. And so what we did was to create a whole complex which was going to be for public use mostly. It's not for development. And they're all civic public functions. And we're going to leave that red thing, which is a highway, which is going to be transformed. So what these sketches shows, one of the first ideas, which was to have these very large courtyards sunken in the earth. And so what we did, this is a model we did for the show, which is quite large. And we did it as a mural because it had to do again with the story we're giving that was all about a group of muralists. But basically what this is showing was the idea that we created this green new plane within which these non-buildings are inserted. So that again, we're trying to deny this object approach in the city to architecture, and instead we're creating these courtyards, trying to attempt now a relationship between nature and the city. And in fact, the idea is that this would be made with a landfill, that you get the new datum within which you're going to carve in with landfill, which is a way to reuse things, and actually try to incorporate some questions that have to do with a certain consciousness about what's happening with the environment, with question of energy, etc., and with some social issues that I think we abandoned for enough time so far. And so what I did after that, that was the show. I developed this with a couple of people in my office, and we just met and developed this project a little bit more as to what each of these pieces would be. The one thing that is important about this project is that it's done in layers. So as opposed to the traditional city where you have one plan and the city incorporates an extruded plan up, this actually is thought as a section. So you have different datum planes. What the drawing on the right is showing is the green plane with the courtyards which range from 100 to 500 feet in diameter. And at the bottom you could see, where you see those diamonds, that's a field for energy collection. The claw that's penetrating is an area for experimental agriculture. And the courtyards are, the functions range from a market that relates to that agricultural production, a center for Olympic training, a cinema, a genome study center, a museum of the 20th century, an oceanographic institute, baths, and workshops where all different types of activities from architecture, film, writing, etc. could take place. That is, it's a place of production and not of consumption. On the left, we can see the different layers, different planes. The upper one, which is the green nature plane. But what starts modifying this project now is that we're dealing with another question that has to do with our society and also with different aspects of culture, which is the machine. So under this nature, we have the machine, which is really trying to incorporate another element that is at the base of the struggle between nature entropy, but also in terms of the forces that go through in the city and in our culture, which are the forces of desire, and many of them are through language, and others are through machines that will also have an effect in producing other types of conditions as much as language would. Under the machine that moves all these things around, you can circulate, as we'll see in a moment, from any of these areas to the next through this connected mechanism are the courtyard spaces, and underneath it all are the ghosts of the grids. And here's the machine, this is another model we produced, which is the mechanical apparatus underlying these courtyards. And these are two more views. And actually it moves, but I'm not a good photographer enough to show this in movement. And here we can see the level, the plan at the level of the movement, and we can see the way that all of these different plans are connected. And you see a center, which is where the space, that's the courtyard space, takes place, and around it, the movement system that will take you from one to the other. These courtyards, I want to say, came from a very strong experience that I've had in the desert in Tunisia many years ago, and it stayed with me always, which was the fact that being in these courtyards where these people live actually in houses that are around open courtyards in the desert, sunken, being in one of those courtyards at night, you can look up at the sky, and when you look at the stars, the effect is really as you're looking at the celestial dome. And it's a very powerful experience. And so I thought that to bring stars and the sky to the city wouldn't be such a bad idea after all. Here we see another level of plan where we can see now the way that you can have paths between every one of these courtyards with its different functions from one to the next, besides the movement that you would go through the machine. So that in fact the idea here is that and this is done in black on purpose because you have this mass in between which is not totally defined, where you would have your thickness of your building as it goes through, but you're going to have a zone, there will be a gray zone of indefinition. This is a more detailed development of the market, and the market is also done with a mechanism that moves around, all around the courtyard, and in fact you have this little red piece that it's like a pinwheel that moves at an angle, and so it's almost like the old delis, how do you call these mechanic ones? You know what they're called, where the machines move, you get the sandwich? The automat, exactly. So it's a macro automat. Here we can see on the left the sections, so that you can see that this project has been thought in sections, and there are sections through different courtyards. One is the Oceanographic Institute, the other is the market, the other is the workshops. And to the right, there is the development of the Oceanographic Institute, which was done with me by somebody who has not studied architecture before, who's an intern of mine, and I think he did a fabulous job. And what it is, it's a very deep space, courtyard, with a wall that looks straight onto the water, like cut in half. And in this space, all those gray elements are these corridors in glass where all the people working in laboratories are there, and they're intersecting in space. And above this all is suspended an enormous aquarium where you circulate through the paths that reflect the grids from the city. This is topped from above by a plane that you can see on the left with lots of little windows, so you can see down onto this space. And at the same time, when you're down below, you can look up and have the light come through this horizontal facade. Here we have two more details. This is the movie theater, which of course has to work with earphones, since you're going to be able to watch. You have a movie theater to the right and one to the left, so you have two screens tied together, and balconies from where you can watch the movie. It's a kind of drive-in cinema without the car. And to the right is a section of the workshops, which in fact are fragmented in spaces that range from the very small spaces where you do computer work to the larger spaces where you could be working in sculpture or film or anything like that. Now from the city, I jumped directly into the interior. And the reason for doing this is because I believe that the city relates very much to the interior, and I share this idea with some work that Beatriz Colomina has developed in talking about Loss and Le Corbusier and public space and private space, which is this idea of the facade in the city as this mask that is really hiding or this plane of separation between the most public space and this very, very private space, that which relates to the city in a way through these openings, which are the windows. And this project is very much like that. And in fact, the drawing on the left is showing a system of openings as it goes from front. This apartment is located in the, not the uppermost, but the two below that floors, and it's a duplex. And it's almost developed in brackets between one front to the city, which is the park, and the other one that is the center of the block. This was a total renovation, so the only thing left were the walls. And what the idea was here, besides this layering of planes from front to back, was trying to live very much like the city, the sense of a sequence and a flow of space, a sequential organization, while at the same time defining rooms. So to the left you see this pinwheel organization where you enter, and this is the living area and dining, and those are services. And upstairs, the part that's occupied by the reception area is the master bedroom, where the wall in the back continues the plane from below, where you see the fireplace, and then to the back are 2 bedrooms. One of the nice things about doing this apartment was that it had been done before by Bob Stern in 1969, and then he had a wing added by Michael Graves. So really it was an archaeological site of postmodernism, and we were very happy to take it down. So I'm going to show you some pictures of the views. Bob Stern was a little bit upset, but he told me he liked the ellipse after all. So these are views from the entrance looking up to the stair. One of the things, there are 2 themes that we worked here. That one is the doors, which are doors as spaces, like the one here, which is a door connecting a media room area and a living room, but that is a bar in between, and the walls that are volumes. So we have a number of doors that are all different, and then these walls are freestanding there, but are treated also as volumetric and as generating spaces. Here we see a view towards the entrance and the fireplace, and this wall is actually one of the planes that's parallel to the windows that you see in the slide on the right, that has these openings that go from front to back, and you can see the depth here that is marking these 2 openings onto the living room. The vertical now opening is this ellipse, which was not there. The beam was there, and we left it exposed. This is looking now from the dining room area onto the front, and you see the park there. And these planes, the 2 planes of steel, vertical and the horizontal alabaster, are in fact marking this condition of the vertical plane and the horizontality of the situation of habitation in the city. And now looking from the living to the dining area, there's these fragmented windows, which are a set of narrow windows that are now breaking the view to the back, which is the inner part of the block, and that instead of having this open view as you have to the park, now it works as a mural, so every time you move you get a different view. These are the 5 vertical windows, which are slashed actually, so you don't have an open view. And to the left you have a vertical connection between the 2 levels. This is a view from the stair looking down, and this is both actually, looking down from one part and then looking down a little bit further down. This is another door to the left, which is a wing plane door put vertical, and which is finished by this wedge of steel. And what is here is you're looking onto the bedroom, which is framed by another opening, so that when you enter that room, you see the back of the bed, and you'll see the windows from a frame. And this is the ellipse as seen from above. Here you have a close-up. To the left is the bathroom penetrating into the bedroom, and this is a view from the master bathroom through a stainless steel screen all the way to see the view of the park. This is the inside of the bathroom. And this is another bathroom we did there, a powder room. And to the right is another door which we did, which in fact hides just a cabinet for cookies, I guess. This is a project that is just finished, and all I want to show actually is this screen that I designed, which is a parchment and wood screen. And I like the idea of this screen that because it's a very fetishistic object. I realize that the screen has this whole thing about women dressing behind the screen and where you can see or you can't see. And so this screen can be opaque depending on the light, but also it can tell you what's behind, which is this grid. But actually what I want to do, and I was thinking this actually in the airplane again, which is like to have a figure behind, photograph the shadow of a figure there moving. This screen is composed of a number of blocks, and it actually started as an homage to Eileen Gray. And it can also move. It's made in 3 pieces that can move each of them all together, or every piece, every block, in vertical lines, as you can see here, from being totally straight to moving in all very different kinds of combinations. And actually, this is for an apartment for a young woman. She's our youngest client. She's 23 and a student at Barnard. And I think that having the screen for a woman's apartment, I guess my unconscious must have worked somehow or other, because the screen is, I think it's a very feminine thing. And I also like the idea that you have the body there mixed with the city grid in a way that appears at this other scale. So this is basically what the screen is doing also is, like you see, it looks like a very thin plane that divides 2 spaces. And since my client is Chinese, Chinese have a whole science about spaces and how they have to be enclosed so spirits won't run away. And so this screen is doing that. It's really fooling the spirits. So you can make it so they won't run away, but you also make them, they could filter through. And here you see the other side of the screen, which is the wood structure. And we can see it here. And here it's opposing a volume that is on the other side, it's all solid, and they are really playing in contrast to each other, whereas one is very solid, volumetric, and the other is very tenuous and dynamic. And this is the last project I'm going to show, which is a house. And this house is going to be completed in about 2 months maximum. And this is the site model. The house is a summer house. It's on a 7-acre field on a pond. And what you see here is basically what we did as the landscape model, which consists of a circular vineyard, a row of 55 linden trees undulating the entrance, and berms that are berming around the swimming pool, the tennis court, and the garage. So all the structures that are beside the house are related to these natural berms. Between the berm of the tennis court and the vineyard is a meadow of wildflowers. The house is really made out of a number of pieces. In fact, it's basically a bar and a number of towers connected by bridges. So in fact, again, it's rather than being a one single element, it's a clustering of these towers that creates somewhat a kind of village. What you see on the left is the ground floor plan, And where you see the space between the two geometries, that of the towers and that of the bar, is the entry hall. And the ground floor, which is this bar, holds all the public spaces, which is a den, sunroom, a living room, a dining room, and a kitchen, breakfast room, and in the circular base of the tower is a library. On that other base is a media room, and to the other side are 3 open areas. On the upper floor, there are only these bridges and towers, which have on the left, it's the wing of the master bedroom, and to the right, we call the motel, which is 3 guest rooms. This is a view of a number of drawings we did, seeing some perspective views of the towers and the bar, and a roof view of these volumes as well. The bar has a vaulted roof, and the towers are quite idiosyncratic, and they're all different. And they started as a bar with all little houses, and each of these houses got transformed, and we have only one left of the original. Here you see, this is the greenhouse tower, the gazebo, the media tower, the lighthouse tower, the caretaker's tower, and the little house. And this is a view of the site. That's the view at the very end, is the house under construction seen from the pond. And this is a view from the house to the pond and the surrounding fields. I mean, it's really spectacular. Not the house, I mean the site. And this is a construction, and what we did is that we actually builded the bridges as bridges and the towers as towers, and I thought that would be very simple, and it turns out it's a lot more difficult, because you have like 3 different structural systems combined, and also, so it's very complicated structurally, because each of these towers is basically holding on its own and tenuously attached by the bridge. And then what we did also is to decide to leave all the structure exposed, which of course also makes it a lot more complicated, but a lot more interesting. So these are views under construction. There's the one plane which is masonry, which is the one of the entry of the wedge, which has a double curvature roof on it. And that space that's there and occupied on the right, you see later on with the cylindrical glass tower that's going there. This is 2 more views. To the left you have the gazebo that's connected to the master bedroom tower, where you see this green covering. Actually, that's the end of the vault, which is going to be all glass. It is already. I just didn't have a picture when I came here. And this is a view going around. Here you have the view to the pond, and the bar is very Miesian in a way. It just has this vault and the continuous wall of French doors that are all exactly the same. The towers are standing on steel legs. On that side you see the little house and the lighthouse, which is not finished cladding. The cladding is all clapboard, basically, with the exception of this tower, which is shingles. And we tried to use wood in different ways, and this is supposed to get really dark. This side is interesting because you have the end of the wedge as it curves, and this one bay window that we made there on the middle guest room, which you can see, but actually has the structure of the bridge running right through. These are 2 details. This is the bridge as seen from inside, and the laminated circular beam to the left, that is the part where the glass tower exists. This is a view of the crossed window looking out, and this is the vault inside with the exposed decking. This is a view now through the gazebo to the fields across, and this looking the other way where we can see the pool house. This is a pool house which consists of another masonry wall where these two changing cabins intersected, and you have a semi-cylindrical bar area, which is this here. And the pool in front, which as you see, it's all still very raw. And this is the way the cabins relate to this wall, and this is a view to the other side. And here we can see the garage, which has these two very large doors on this mound, which is going to have grass going down, like some soft grass, and the pool house wall. And actually what this is creating, and I couldn't photograph this, is a kind of courtyard as you arrive and enter the house. And I think this is it. Thank you.
Well, for those of you who want to ask questions of Diana Agrest and Gisue Hariri, now is the time. I can fly. Turn up the house lights. Could you turn up the house lights, please? Thank you. No, I'm going to ask the audience first, I think. Could we ask the people who aren't staying for questions to please be quiet so that the people who can ask questions can ask them? Now that I've shut everybody up, somebody ask a question.
Come on, someone wants to ask a question.
No?
No, you are.
Okay, Michael, thank you.
Diana started by saying that she continued to work in an opposite way and went from large to small. We showed both large and small. To get started, perhaps you could respond to Diana.
Do you want this? Yeah, do you want this so you can be heard? Okay.
Everybody's going to want to use this, I guess. I thought just to get things started, Diana started by saying that her interest and her point of departure is one of conceiving from large scale to small scale. And Gisue started or showed both large and small scale. I was wondering if you would like to respond to that, whether you start small and go large or you're conceiving in both directions simultaneously.
I shouldn't have opened my mouth saying, come on, let's have a question. I don't know actually how to present this, but in fact I was thinking earlier on to be here with Diana and knowing Diana's work more on the urban scale, actually. Recently, they have been building these beautiful projects. Whether our work was similar or not. And it's kind of interesting because I think the work, to me at least, comes across that has perhaps the same rigor, has some of the similar, maybe in terms of treatment of some materials or some of the attention to the formal aspects of it, and a certain, I guess, modern way of approach. But then on the other hand, I think maybe, if I'm wrong, I guess Diana can answer this. She begins, it seems to me that their work does begin on the urban scale. And our work is vice versa. It begins from the very small elements. We really literally began with the idea of a wall. And then what do you do next? And then what do you do next? It doesn't quite begin. In other words, it's not deductive, it's more inductive. We begin with a given or with smaller elements, and then as we go along, we compose them, as opposed to have this more of a holistic, larger plan in mind that then, you get into the details of it later. I'm very surprised, actually, that there are not so many questions. I was just at Kent State, and after my talk there was about 1 hour of questions, in terms of details, how much things cost, how do you do this. I guess SCI-Arc already has answered some of these questions to the students. I saw you have fabulous facilities here in terms of shops. As Robert De Niro would say, are you talking to me? The first project,
Was that the lighthouse project? No. Before the...
that was just a theoretical project on our own. It was exhibited in a show in Mexico. What we try to do is actually combine the problem we have confronted is, generally speaking, there are architects who have theories, and there are architects that we call practitioners. When I went to school, nobody that taught me actually had an office. And then when I got out, they told me, you know too much theory. This is not how the real world goes about. So I think it's ridiculous. I think one can think and one can draw and one can make projects. It's just a matter of how much you're trying to put in. So in our projects, in our work, we are trying to constantly invent and learn from ourselves and somehow, implement it by building it. It works normally both ways. Sometimes we learn as we are making a project. Sometimes we learn as we are drawing a project, and later on some parts of it or some sections of it could be incorporated in a project. But the first project I showed was a theoretical work. It looked like? Oh, it's, yes. The foam comb mother project actually came first, and then the DMZ project came afterwards. In fact, I think later on you will see one of the portions of this bridge that we made, the DMZ project, is this, one of the things that we have been preoccupied with now is this idea of volumes penetrating one another. It's fascinating because spatially things change. For a while we were working with planes, which were the walls. Now we are getting more into studying how volumes would interact with one another. And one small volume is almost like this window that the DMZ bridge had, exactly, that now we are incorporating in the house in Connecticut, in the addition. It looks fabulous.
It may be. Yeah, probably. I mean, you know, the problem with the unconscious is that you don't always know it. So it's basically something that, for me, I developed that over the years, and it comes from my theoretical work also, that there is all this repository of forms that really inform our architecture and that we are not even conscious about. And I believe that's how it works. I don't believe forms come just from the books of architecture. And we live, the city is the most important production, I think, of the century. Of course, it's the most important production over many centuries. But I would say in relation to other things that are being produced, I think the city is the predominant cultural, how would I say, I don't want to say artifact because it's not an artifact, but I would say it's the strongest cultural production, you know, and the most complex. And I think it's impossible to think architecture without it, whether you know it or you don't know it, and that's what I'm saying, it's the unconscious. So, and it's probably true in the last house. I don't have it all together, I don't know. I know there are lots of things in that house. There are lots of the idea of the found object and the denial of the single object and the very diagrammatic, each piece is what it is. You know, there are all these things, but I don't know it very well. I don't know. I don't have it all together.
Deanna, I have a question for you. You sort of hinted at this when we talked earlier today, but the last project that you showed, the house, seems to me much more figurative than any other project of yours that I've seen. And I'm just wondering would you talk about that, or how you account for it, or why is it so figurative?
Yeah. Yes, it's true. I told you I set myself a trap actually, because I told you it was. I thought this is something I thought myself thinking about this project, that in fact you can't put it. You can't box it stylistically, and I like that. I like not to have projects that are about style. And so, but you have these pieces, and you can say it's traditional, and you can say it's modern, but it's modern. And now I realized that it was what one could call figurative, because there are these pieces of figuration in some other type of organization. And I think it's because of this transformation. The towers became this game, you know, it became very whimsical, and okay, let's have it, let's have this, let's have that tower, and the greenhouse tower. And so when we're playing with language, we're making a story. The house is called Villa Amore by the client, so maybe it was Romeo and Juliet. So there are all these things built in there somehow or other. Of course, we're playing with the towers, the cluster of the farmhouses, that you have all these pieces too. So there are all these things that we're not mimicking anything, in fact, because you haven't seen any of those. And they were not contextual. We were not trying to be contextual at all. Although I think it worked very well in this context. And I think that that's why it's figurative, because it really relates to all these different elements of figuration, but it has a very strong abstract organization. So I don't know if it's the right word, that's what I thought it would be.
The mounds around the tennis court and around
Yeah.
the mound that creates the garage almost were it was like some yearning desire to never something and never circle around.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, yeah, and actually I had forgotten totally about it, but you're right, because the first landscape plan that we had modeled had a wine cellar, had a courtyard like that, because I've been dying to do this thing for a long time. And it had a mound with exactly that courtyard, and it had a wine cellar inside, actually around. And I couldn't convince my client, basically. And so it is really, it started from there, and then it got transformed. But also, it was the idea of not having more objects. I wanted this garage to just be part, to have just the doors, you know, and be part of the landscape. So it was both, yeah, but it relates definitely.
You had a question?
I didn't hear the question.
The DMZ project.
Oh, how did I work with Mr. Park?
With Mr. Park, you know. No,
I did it. Yes, Kyung Park. He's the director of Storefront. No. Basically what Storefront did, Olympics was in Korea, and 3 years ago. And they actually just invited some artists and architects to respond to the fact that politically, unfortunately, the two Koreas are separated, North and South, and basically giving proposals of what can one do? Can architecture have act in a way to solve these kinds of political solutions? Can art help? And that was the question. We basically thought, well, sure it can. If you have the right place, with the right spaces, hopefully with the right sequence, maybe you can somehow inspire people and show them via their movement, via circulation, long hallways, via looking at the landscape and so on, the ridiculousness of the conflict. But we didn't each personally work with them. This was just a personal project. I have actually a question for Diana. I'm very excited about some of the new work you're showing here today. I had not seen the project with the machines, the layered project. It's quite fascinating and beautiful, but very different from all the other projects that you've done. I had never seen you actually working in such a mechanized area. Maybe do you want to talk a little bit about that? Is this like a new direction, or this was just a special project you did, or?
I don't know. I think it may be. I think it's about bringing our issues that interest me into play, and I really I thought there were questions that one had to think with the city, and that you can't think the city always is just what the city is. So that was one aspect. So the first thing I thought was like, let's not have buildings. You know, that was the first thing. I mean, I hate the idea that everything has to be a skyscraper, basically. And so that was really almost an extreme reaction. Then when I did that, I tell you, this thing, you know, is in my unconscious now. But I always say that one of the things that's fascinating about working at an urban scale, I guess in architecture too, is the articulation between the subject and history. And so in a way, well, this is the subject was these courtyards, but it also has a history. And the machinery came up actually as a dialogue with these two people that worked with me. And that's why I really tried this as a way. I love working with people. And so I tried ideas and got feedback, and so we worked together and we had a lot of fun. And the idea of this, because of the circular courtyard, then the idea of the machine, came out, and maybe it's got to do with some ideas in reading a lot of Duchamp and the bride made bare by the bachelors and the oculus witnesses and a lot of those things. And the idea, there was another thing also had to do with movement, and with the idea with these courtyards that actually were these houses that I mentioned in the desert, in the Sahara, were the lodgings of a nomadic group of people, which are the Berber. And so that brought to my mind also the idea of what is called like smooth surface, which is like the desert, right? You don't see the path of people moving are raised, and our cities, which are marked and striated, and they remain. And so I thought it would be interesting to leave these marks as ghosts, which are underlying this grid of the city, and have a different movement that really played within what was already marked. So the circular courtyard gave a sense of the circular possible motion. And that's how it came. So it comes from different, really it's like a condensation of all these different things. And I'm thinking this looking back. I don't think all this before I do it,
So it wasn't like you've done this kind of urban approach or done with the grid, now let's try something
Well,
else.
no, I'm not done with the grids, for instance, as I showed in the Chicago project. I'm interested in this idea of the pieces of fabric, the fabric as object. So it's another way of denial of the object. And to have these elements which are about places or spaces. And so in a way but they are different. And I feel that this San Francisco project is, for me, is of interest. That I'm excited about it. I think there's something there I don't even know very well, but that's something I'm going to develop, but I don't know exactly what it is. And I like to show it, and I use this lecture as an excuse to complete some of those drawings actually, because I wanted to do it. And I hope there's something there. Maybe there's nothing, but I just hope there is.
Other questions?
No time, I'll really have a question.
No?
I just want to clarify one thing, because I think that just your first question about the going from the city to the smaller scale or from small to large. For me, it's not a matter of scale. It's a conceptual problem. It's a theoretical problem. Because for me, it started as the question of modern architecture and the crisis of modern architecture, which manifests itself particularly at the level of the city and the design of the city. And I think that's the crisis. I think all the thing about more, that happened, for 15 years where modern is boring or, it's ridiculous. There's nothing boring about modern architecture. Nobody needs ornament. But the question of the city is the real question, and the problem, the discourse of the city in modern architecture was the problem. And so for me, in order to really look critically at modern architecture in a really dialectic way, you really have to start the city. And then from there, go down and incorporate the question of city as culture, and then see how the implications of that. And then, but that's for me because I was interested in developing, in revising some questions critically of architecture, and that's what it's done. I think that what Gisue is doing is great, you know, to go from this very intimate and small scale and direct feeling for a small object, for a bathroom or a sink or a fireplace or a material. It's not that I'm against that, it's just for me, I do it because it is the way I've been thinking it basically. So.
No.
Can you speak louder? Speak louder.
Did everybody hear that question? About, the question was, have they developed relationships with craftspeople and contractors in New York, ongoing relationships that are important to their projects?
Well, I think that you have to. I mean, you first decide what's important and you find the people to do it. I didn't mention this because, you know, this is a short presentation, but and I think, I don't want to speak for Gisue, but I think we share this, which is the concern for materials. I don't believe in, I hate sheetrock architecture myself, and I love materials. You know, I think there's a great, you know, I go through the walls and touch them, you know, I mean, there's fantastic sensuousness in materials and light and reflections or dullness or all of that. And you have to work like crazy. That apartment, you know, just drove me crazy because I have 4 kinds of different finishes of steel and none of them existed. So I had to work this with the person who worked the steel and say, this is what I want to get. How do we do it? And so we'd have 5, 10 samples of stuff until you say, okay, that's it. You know, and the same with the wood. I mean, with this guy, you say crafts. I mean, this guy was not up to this job, so by the time he finished, he learned it. You know, of course, I hadn't done it before, but I know how these things are done. So you have to know in a way as much, if not more, in sometimes, than the person who's working if you want to get what you want. And it's not easy. I don't know for Gisue, but there are good craftsmen. But it's not ever easy, you know, it takes a lot of work.
I think Diana pretty much answered it. Obviously you have to work very closely with these people. We have not yet been lucky enough to have enough budget to literally hire specialists and craftspeople. So basically we've gone down to the idea of finding artists and them being artists just becoming interested, working with us, and somehow figure out a way of communication because artists cannot read drawings of architecture. So you make models and go to their shop and do whatever has to be done to do that. Contractors are a bit easier if they take on a project. Like I think at least the ones that we are doing, they know right from the first minute they're going to lose money. So after that we become friends and the point is let's finish it and make everybody happy. So in that sense you become good friends and work with one another. I was horrified at the beginning actually as a woman architect to go on job sites as far, I mean, and you saw how involved we are. I mean, you are constantly there. I was proven wrong that in fact it's not that difficult, and once they get used to you and they know you are not the decorator on the job, they behave, and you can become friends and make a project work. Well, it was very difficult because it was a three-dimensional piece. We had never done a stair like that before. Neither did these artists. We basically first drew it because we were getting bids from manufacturers and people who do steel stairs. Then, after it worked out that it was not even half as much, 1/3 of all the prices we got working with these sculptors. That meant we had to do the work. We did shop drawings. From shop drawings, then we did a model. From model, then we went to the job site and basically made templates with these people in order to make it work. I will never do it again. That was it.
You had a question?
I know that Diana has had a desire to make film sometime, and I wonder how your desire is varying in relation to the recent work that you have this year in San Francisco and the publishing that was being questioned before. And if in general you'd like to discuss or give a comment on the relation between this desire in you and your process. I mean, I think you as someone different in this regard than architects who might be looking to film theory or some way to build their work. You can talk to me about an independent desire to make film. And so I posed it to you as a question specifically about Gisue and San Francisco, but more generally about your thoughts related to media.
Well, it's my fantasy career. I think I chickened out because, I know it's as hard as architecture, if not more. So when you do it without thinking, it's easy, but you have to think about, the whole thing. But I might do it one of these days. I have used film theory, as a matter of fact. It's been more interesting and more useful to me to think architecture than anything I've read in architecture. So for many years I've been reading about film and film theory and so on. That I always work thinking about film, whether consciously or unconsciously, particularly, you're right, in the urban projects, not just the San Francisco. The San Francisco project happened to have had a narrative that was given to us, and that was used. I don't think it was inspiring to a certain degree. It wasn't a great text. And at some point I got fed up of doing these sort of, super abstract conceptual drawings, slashing the grid and all this. And I said, forget it, let's just do a project. And so I used basically kind of a program from what the text was to incorporate there. So there is a certain narrative as a program that is there in all these different programs. But there's also a critical thing about trying to do something that's not speculation, that's not for money, that is public, that is civic, that is cultural, and that is about producing culture, not consuming. So there's all those things. In terms of the way film, I think that this idea of thinking always sequentially, and the idea of dealing with spaces and public spaces particularly in the city, the idea of the fabric, the idea of this open-ended thing, all of that comes from film. And my position is that film is a pertinent art for our time. The way that painting might have been the pertinent art for the beginning of the century, I think painting is not enough. I think that film and the city have a lot in common. There's this multiplicity of languages, of pieces that go together, of open-endedness, of temporal quality. And I think that for me, I just like to think about that. And as a matter of fact, the cover of my book that's coming out doesn't have an architecture image, it has a film image. So, from a musical film, actually.
Which one?
42nd Street.
42nd Street. Yeah, there's one more question.
Yeah. I don't know if I understand your question correctly.
I'm wondering about the role of production.
Oh.
Things that you perceive in your work in relation to the theoretical conceptual thinking, and if there's some sort of dilemma or point that you reach where maybe one is.
Well, I consider myself a savage theorist. So, you know, I grab things from wherever. So I think if I see it from the airplane, maybe I see it because I can see it, because of what I've been thinking before, and maybe somebody else wouldn't see it, or would see it and not really look at it. So I think it's, you know, it's really a dialectic thing. You always have, it comes through perception, but also then you put it into your more intellectual framework, and it becomes part of another system. And I think I don't think you can make fixed compartments, you know, between one and the other. You know, the fact is that I started doing theoretical work because I have questions in architecture, not because my mind is necessarily more analytical than synthetic. So it maybe started from, I don't know if you call it perception, but from a sense of questions that were in architecture. So maybe it had to do with things I sorted in. So, but you know, architects are all maniacs. You can't stop looking at stuff, and you're looking, you know, I've been living in Manhattan for 20 years, and I look all the time at every building I see. Every time I walk in the street, I'm looking up, you know. So I guess when you're in the airplane, you can only look down.
Well, I think we'll wrap it up here. Thank you all for bearing with us. Thank you for coming.